introduction, a lot of your work with the Michigan Citizen for years and other publications, and you're definitely a scholar when it comes to different things in international relations, especially around peace movements. And so that means when we're talking peace movements, that definitely puts you in understanding conflicts, war, resources, economics, and how things travel. And right now, a lot is being highlighted about what's happening in Niger. But before we even get there, let's talk a little bit about France. Historically, France's role in, let's be frank, colonization of different places throughout the world. One of them, back to a Detroit connection, happens to be even Detroit itself at one point in time. Detroit was a colony of France, hence the term, the name Detroit. Like other places in and throughout here, like we know New Orleans, France had a stronghold of a lot of the United States footprint at one point in time. As you know, many people look to colonization as something that Spain and Portugal had a good foothold in. And obviously Britain, as they said, the sun never sets on Britain because it was so much across the earth that the sun would never set on anything of a British territory. France, often looked at from the viewpoint of many Americans through American media, is looked at as kind of a space and place that that kind of the rule was more in other forms of culture, food and wine and arts and theater, but war was also a big part of the history of France. Even within France, if you study the history of France, even our neighbors to the north of Canada, people speak French Canadian. French Canadians exist because France colonized and still even has close relations to the colonies there in Canada as well. So as we look at this lens, we look at a lot of the instability that happens in France right now that I think is triggering some of the dominoes of things happening in Africa. But there has been a relationship between France and Africa that has been exploited for centuries now, where more of these conflicts are coming to a head today. And a lot that even plays out in France currently, as I'm understanding, has a lot of the Africans looking for a higher quality of life than what they have received, and being there in France, working as, I guess you would say, minimal or at risk or underpaid labor, has caused for some conflicts to even exist there. So that's like the Algerians there in France, and now we're looking at Niger and what's happened, and even the president that was in place in Niger, as we're finding, that has been excommunicated to the Arab country that he's originally from. Let's talk a lot about this history because I'm just getting bits and pieces as I'm doing other stuff with Detroit is Different and all of this other things. Let's really get the information. So let's talk France. Historically, what was France's role in colonizing the world?
It was profound. All we have to do is look at, for example, the situation in Hispaniola, which today part of the island is called Haiti. And that was one of the most prosperous. At one point, it was the most prosperous colony internationally, and they did it through the exploitation of African slave labor. Began in the 17th century. It continued by the conclusion of the 18th century. You had the beginning of the French exploitation on a grand scale of Africans in Haiti, and of course that sparked a revolutionary movement in 1791, which lasted for some 12 years, and Haiti was able to overthrow French slavery and colonial rule in Hispaniola. And of course, that was the first and perhaps the only successful slave revolution where the enslaved Africans were able to organize themselves, destroy the property of the French on the island. They also fought Spain which was also attempting to regain control of Hispaniola, and Britain, which was a longtime rival of France. So in 1804, the Haitian Republic was declared, but that wasn't the end of the story because they imposed an embargo on Haiti after 1804.
Okay, and let's stop there a little bit to give a little bit more history. And I want to say move up to the mic a little bit closer because I want to get that rich discussion. You can actually move the mic up a little bit.
All right.
All right, and move up a little bit more. All right, so with that being said, we're going to like when we unpack a lot of the game you just gave information. I call information game. So given that game that you just laid on us about Haiti and how that came to be, and we're more familiar with some of the names with modern history of definitely Toussaint L'Ouverture, but also Dessalines. But even in this, the warrior class that were there, now that we have more information, were the collective communal war tactics of like killing campfires, understanding so much more about nature. This gives the history of what now people label as like voodoo and a lot of other things that come pervasive. But at the time, the French army is led by Napoleon. And Napoleon is looked at, even to this day, as honored as this like grand general that is one of the leading, when we look at Western history, how he's labeled, leading war generals in the history of war and desecration and annihilation. That's what I'm labeling that, colonization, but they will label it as conquest. And his armies defeated multiple times from a lot of people that aren't even necessarily soldiers. It's just more so the tacticians of knowing and understanding the lay of the land. But let's talk about the richness of what's there in Haiti. Sugar was a key, I guess, mineral, asset, resource that was being traveled through the world. And a lot of what was happening in the Caribbean when they talk about enslavement were working people till they died, especially that island, as you call it, Hispaniola, and on the other side now Haiti, and the other half being the Dominican, and so much that has happened to Haiti, even to this day, connecting to Canada and the United States of America in certain ways, with our Coast Guard having some conflicts with what's labeled as terrorists there on the island, still going back and forth over like some oil fields, sugar, and other minerals, because it's all about resources happening. Can you share a little bit of information about the resources on Haiti, why it was so valuable, and when that collapse happened, how did that impact how France moved forward with their conquest and colonization?
Initially, the island was targeted by Spain. In fact, Christopher Columbus had gone there initially during the latter part of the 15th century looking for gold. And eventually, the competition between the European powers accelerated. Fights between Spain and France, between Portugal and Spain, and the British, of course, and the Netherlands were also involved. It was a scramble, not only for Africa and African people, but it was a scramble for the world. So if we keep that in mind and recognize that all of these geopolitical regions are valuable because of their resources, natural resources, and also the labor of the people which they can exploit. And it's very similar to what you see happening today. We have what is considered today in the United States a surplus of labor. Yet workers cannot get an increase in the minimum wage, and there's still a huge gap which is increasing between those who have and those who have not. So France was heavily involved in the whole process, which later became known as the triangular trade, the Atlantic slave trade. And they were fighting with other European countries for dominance of the waterways and dominance of the land throughout the world. And Africa was a key aspect of that whole struggle.
And now let's go right into, as you say, the embargo, because this is a new iteration and theory of economic suppression that happens. So Haiti defends itself, but now what is Haiti dealing with to this day from back then,
Well, after they were defeated, we
after
have
the French was defeated?
yeah, after the French were defeated, because a lot of property that was owned by the French was destroyed by the Africans on the island. They burned down hundreds of sugar plantations. They killed hundreds of slave masters and destroyed plantations and other personal property of the French colonialists. Even though they won the revolution, France wanted to be repaid what they call indemnity from the Haitian people for the destruction of their property on the island during the revolution. So they imposed an embargo on the country in order to force them to repay for the damage that was done. The United States followed suit. They refused to recognize Haiti between 1804 all the way up to the Civil War in 1862. So we're talking about 58 years of an embargo that was also carried out by the United States. Now you may ask, well, the United States is not France, but at the same time, the example of Africans who were enslaved, who were able to organize themselves and rise up and overthrow the slave masters, was clearly a threat to the United States as well.
Definitely. And let's talk a little bit even about that. That leads to some other American history of what's labeled as the quote unquote Louisiana Purchase.
Right.
How does that impact the Louisiana Purchase?
Well,
And really how Detroit becomes a part of America instead of we us speaking parlez-vous français,
yes.
you know?
Yeah, what happened was that because of the military losses and the economic losses in the Haitian campaign, Napoleon, rather than go into complete financial ruin in France, he sold land to those who considered themselves the leadership of the United States in the early part of the 19th century, which became the Louisiana Purchase, which was a whole lot of land that was transferred from France to the United States. Louisiana, of course, was a huge aspect of that. But also, it impacted Spain as well, because a lot of people who left Haiti, uh, in fact, Africans, in fact, who were under the Spanish control of Haiti, went to Mexico. And they went to Mexico and settled there and remained there. And their descendants are still there today. So, yes, it played a major role. The Africans in Haiti and their rebellion and their revolution against French imperialism reshaped the territorial contours of the United States as well.
So I think this is where, like, you know, you probably weren't paying attention in your history class. You were probably like sleeping or something. But I want people to understand this as we venture into how yesterday has a whole lot to do with what today is. So even with the Louisiana Purchase, as quote unquote how it's sold, the Louisiana Purchase is what becomes a lot of what I label as the stuff that pisses me off, but those John Wayne films, the conquest of the Old West, quote unquote, meaning that Louisiana Purchase was a lot of untamed territory. They were labeled as savages. A lot of the natives, a lot of the maroon people, a lot of those people were there. And in this purchase, it was like, okay, we're going to have everything basically west of the Mississippi, which was colonies that France, quote unquote, had that never were developed but looking to get into. It's like venture capitalism, venture colonization. And now with this purchase, America could reach out to other Europeans and say, hey, you can come here. You gotta settle out there, quote unquote, even the video game Oregon Trail that people may remember. You just got to go out west and kind of do it on your own, but you're a part of America. So this is Kansas, Oklahoma, a lot of Texas, a lot of even as you would call like the border for the Spanish American War. Like these things are happening in this from this act, and these dominoes that are falling all kind of connected to France saying, look, we got to recoup, we got to regroup because of everything we lost in Haiti, which was our strong foothold in what would have been that hemisphere of the world.
Yes, and there were plans, even during the 19th century, for the United States to retake Haiti as a aspect of the U.S. territory to reimpose enslavement on African people. It never materialized, but that was a large part of the objective. And during the Civil War, which began in 1861 to 1865, that was when they recognized Haiti as an independent nation state. And that was only done because of the exigencies of the Civil War. They recruited, eventually agreed to recruit our ancestors into the Union Army. Some 200,000 of them served and fought against the Confederacy between 1862 and 1865. So Spain as well had a tremendous influence in the western and also the southeastern part of the United States. We could discuss the Mexican-American War, so-called Mexican-American War during the 1840s, which resulted in the United States taking over huge swaths of territory as well. We talk about Texas, we can talk about California, Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona, and so forth. So the United States, if you look at the actual history of the country, which in fact is not taught accurately in the public schools, oftentimes when they talk about the Louisiana Purchase, they don't mention the fact that it was prompted by the Haitian Revolution, by African people. It's just something that happened because France was facing economic problems. Why were they facing economic problems? Because they were losing their most prosperous colony, the most prosperous colony in the world. So these are factors that are often not taught in the schools, and there's books that are available that people can read, to catch up on this history. For example, C.L.R. James's book, The Black Jacobins, a great historical account of the Haitian Revolution. In reading that book, you get a totally different perspective than you would reading about some other aspects of the slave history, which have been written by people who are actually proponents and apologists of enslavement, not only in the United States, but indeed worldwide.
So let's move forward. So Napoleon's defeat, the Louisiana Purchase. How does France now move forward into colonization of different territories in the world? And I also want you to speak into Vietnam because I'm giving all this, I'm putting all these breadcrumbs together because it all builds to what's happening today.
Yeah, they, of course, were involved in the Atlantic slave trade, France, considerably. So, not only in regard to Haiti, but also other territories in the Caribbean in which France had control of. Also in Africa, they were heavily involved in colonization. You mentioned Algeria earlier. They took over Algeria in 1830. They stayed there until 1962. That's 132 years. And the Algerians had to organize and overthrow French rule. It took several years for them to do so. But this was after decades and decades of massacres, of exploitation of the Algerian people. So this happened in other parts of Africa as well as Asia. You mentioned Vietnam. Had colonized Vietnam. After World War II, when Germany had occupied France, the Nazis had occupied France, and when France was liberated in the 1940s, they attempted after World War II to go back and re-exert their authority in Vietnam. Well, it didn't work. In 1954, they were clearly defeated at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So what happened? They tossed the responsibility to the United States under the Eisenhower administration, and they took up the ongoing colonization of Vietnam, both the North and the South, and that continued up until 1975. The North was liberated, of course, in 1945 after World War II, but then they had to fight an attempt by the French to reimpose colonization. So people who are older can remember the Vietnam War, how it was framed as a struggle against communism to stop the so-called domino effect. And this was a war that the United States had to fight. And we keep hearing this same narrative all the way up until today. If you look at what's going on in Ukraine, we look at what's going on in Niger right now, where the United States is calling upon the government of the CNSP, which is the new government in Niger, to reimpose Mohamed Bazoum, who was a close ally of the United States and France. So France is definitely an imperialist country, and it has been for centuries, and until that changes, it will continue to be so.
All right, and I like that you tied all of that together, and because the classic Kari question can go on for forever, but I like to build that up so we can understand some of this that leads to all of this leading up to something, because that French footprint that's not usually in a lot of American history looked at as, yes, this is a very imperialist power. Almost everything we've seen from Great Britain and the United States of America with our army bases across the world, you can look to France being the same way. Now, after Napoleon's defeat, the leadership looked to, you mentioned Algeria. Where is the focus of things? Because this also, I guess, is a time that, like, soon after, you're looking at World War One and World War Two that have direct relationships. What's the tonality, just like in that space from 1804 up to World War One, of what's colonization in France? What are they looking? What territories? What are they doing across the world?
Well, first of all, I just want to mention that the Haitian Revolution did have an impact on Africans who were enslaved here in the United States. In fact, in 1811, there was a extensive African enslaved revolt that took place in Louisiana, credited with being, quote, one of the largest slave rebellions in the United States. It did not succeed, but the people involved in it, as reported, were people who were born in Haiti or born in Africa and taken to Haiti as slaves and then wound up being sold to the areas in Louisiana. And that's where they wound up. But it did have an impact. The resistance of the Africans in Haiti had an impact on the slave conditions in the United States. It intensified the repressive apparatus of the antebellum South during the early and mid 19th century. Also, it provided an example and hope for people that slavery could be overthrown. And you had other rebellions that took place during that time period. The attempt by Denmark Vesey, for example. Even before that, Gabriel's revolt in Virginia in 1800. 1831, of course, there was the Nat Turner Rebellion, whose anniversary, I think, is this month, in fact, when the Nat Turner Rebellion took place in Southampton County, Virginia. And then, of course, there were other rebellions that are
Yeah.
not as well known.
And also, when we think of like that area, as we're finding out more and more, or where more information is becoming more prevalent about the maroon colonies, in especially when we think of Florida,
Yeah.
the Virginias, and that DC, that DMV area, Virginia, Maryland, and things like that. But I just want to speak more so to France's acts after Haiti. Where was France looking to, like, I guess, mark its territory and colonizing?
They were looking at the same time in the Caribbean, which they still have colonies there today. Martinique is there. And of course, there are at least two other colonies. There are French colonies as well in the Indian Ocean. Yeah. So they are still continuing their colonization process. They also have a process of neocolonialism, which they're doing in Africa, where you have people like Mohamed Bazoum, who was the ousted president of Niger. He was heavily supported and financed by France as well as the United States because they have drone bases there. They have French and U.S. troops in Niger. And why are they there? It's to protect the uranium resources.
And I want to get to that, and you're driving me right into that lane. But before I even go there, I wanted to speak more so to the other African countries, and then also France's relationship even with Canada to our north.
Yes, and in Canada, there's been a struggle between the descendants of the French and the English. And in Quebec, the French-speaking people have been oppressed historically. They've been treated like second-class citizens, but they have made some inroads in the sense that it is a bilingual country. I mean, people from primary school all the way through high school are taught both English and France. But at the same time, the people of Quebec have been exploited and oppressed. And in fact, during the 1960s and 1970s, they were allies to some of the most revolutionary currents here in the United States. The FLQ, the Quebec Liberation Front, and others saw the black people in the United States as being comrades, since we were suffering from national oppression here, and they considered themselves to be nationally oppressed in Canada. But at the same time, the ruling class in France continued to spread its influence, its military prowess, and its exploitative mechanisms all across the world. I mentioned the uranium deposits in Niger. They're the eighth largest producer in the world of uranium. So you can imagine what's at stake in Niger, a very large country in West Africa, 25 million people, and they have the eighth largest deposits of uranium in the world. We know what uranium is used for: nuclear weapons. It's used for energy, which France definitely needs right now because of the Ukraine situation, and also other aspects of nuclear technology that's utilized in medicine, healthcare. So they don't want to lose control of that uranium. Orano is a French-owned company that controls the mining and the refining and the distribution of uranium in Niger.
So we're there now. So let's drive further down the street in this. And when you talk about that, a French-owned company that controls uranium deposits in an African nation. Who are there? Are there any Africans that do have a say in any of this? I mean, is there a percentage of money that comes to any of the Africans that is this connected to? Like, what does this look like? Because this, especially from the lens of the Americans' perspective, it's kind of like when you hear the stories of like, wow, you're working in this diamond mine, you're mining in this diamond mine, but you don't own a thing. Like, what's that relationship? Does the nation receive anything for that?
They do. They have a Niger National Energy Corporation, but they receive a minority of the profits as well as the ownership of the uranium resources in Niger. And that is why you have a lot of discontent right now, not only in Niger, but across the entire West Africa region, particularly in those areas that were formerly colonized by France. You've had coups over the last 3 years in Mali, in Burkina Faso, which used to be Upper Volta, and also in Guinea-Conakry, which was also a former French colony. Guinea-Conakry has some of the largest deposits of iron ore and bauxite, very important strategic natural resources for the world capitalist system. And then now in Niger, we have a similar pattern where the military, within the military, and what's interesting about this is that these military leaders who have been carrying out these coups d'etats were actually trained by the United States and France. This is the contradiction. They've attended U.S. war colleges, French war colleges. They've done joint military operations with the United States and France and other NATO countries. And now they're turning against these countries, overthrowing the political systems in which have been instituted and refusing to abide by the dictates of France and the United States. So it just goes to show that no condition is permanent. Things can change, and they can change rather rapidly. So what we have to figure out is, as residents of the United States, as African people here in the United States, what should be our response to all of this? Should we believe what the administration is saying is that their objective in Niger is to reinstate a democratically elected government? What does that actually mean in the light of the fact that the people there do not control the majority interests within their own natural resources? So these are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves here in the United States as African people.
Okay, so now let's get a little bit more so into the political tone of the other things we knew what was happening in France. And the story and the reports that broke out here, most interpreted, were like, okay, it's like a George Floyd situation happening in France,
Yes.
where it was, as I know, the French police murdered an African brother, and I believe from Algeria.
Yeah, he had Algerian ancestry, which is a lot of people in France have North African and West African ancestry.
So what happened? And from there, in these rebellions, things didn't exactly just look like some of the stuff happening in Minneapolis, because it was even like some targeted attacks on like financial institutions, like like it'd be like you know, the response to George Floyd then saying, okay, let me go over to Prudential and burn that down or something like that. Like, what was happening? What was the tone? Please break that down from what you know.
Yeah, well, we do need to go back to the beginning of the year when there was a huge upsurge in the labor movement in France because of Emmanuel Macron instituted
Okay,
pension reforms.
and
He's the
Emmanuel
president
Macron is the president of
of
France.
France.
So please explain what that is. And when you say labor movement, break everything down. We
Well,
don't know nothing.
they still have strong unions in France, and the president wanted to institute what they call pension reforms.
What
Meaning,
does that mean?
well, it meant that you have to work longer in your life before you can collect full benefits in your pensions. And people fought for those pension benefits.
So it's like here, I don't know what it is in America now because we just have a different culture. But for years, it was known that you could retire at 65.
Yes.
So now it was like instead of retiring at 65, we want you to retire at 70.
Yeah.
And you get all your benefits.
Well, in France, it was 62. They moved it up to 64. Plus, you have to work consecutively for 42 or 43 years in order to get full benefits. So that means that
What did it used to be?
no, you didn't have to work 43 years consecutively to receive full benefits at the
Wow.
age of
So
62.
so when you say consecutively, meaning like
Yeah.
okay. Now I'm getting into I'm sounding like the guy on the corner, but I gotta break this down to
Yeah.
make sure I understand this. When I hear consecutive, that means that I have to work in 2011.
Yep.
I got to work in 2012. I got to work in 2013. I got to work in 2014.
Yeah.
The natural next thing becomes, what about a woman that's pregnant? What about if I take maternity leave? What if I'm just naturally? What if I get sick or something? What if I want to help? What if I go back to school?
It's a problem.
So does that
problem.
restart the clock or what happens?
Yeah.
Or I just basically receive less benefits?
You will receive less benefits at the time of retirement.
Because how many people, if you're watching, how many people will work consecutively for 43 years?
It's a good question. If you start at 21, that means by the time you get 64, that's 43 consecutive years of employment, and then you can retire ostensibly with full benefits. If you can hold out that long.
Wow.
Some people can. You know, you have people work in the 70s and 80s. You see it specials and on television and so forth, but many people cannot.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. And the issue is that France itself, the energy companies there and the financial sector there is continuing to make money. They're continuing to receive tremendous profits from the exploitation of resources and labor. And the workers are saying they want some of those profits back in terms of salaries as well as benefits. So that set the stage for what happened to Nahil, who was a young teenage North African youth who was stopped in a traffic dragnet and killed. They claim he tried to run over the police. Other people who were witnesses said that did not happen, and it was just a spontaneous outbreak that lasted for well over a week, that destroyed a lot of property in France, that required the declaration of a state of emergency in France. And it was not just in Paris. It was in other cities, Lyon, Marseille. So yes, it was a widespread national rebellion against police brutality in France. And this got international attention. And as you mentioned, a lot of people drew similarities between what happened in 2020 here in the United States and what transpired in France just earlier this year.
I want to bring up another international point and moment. This happened in last year, October. Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy. So she becomes the first prime minister of Italy. And even in the international scope, she was looked at as being like a Italian Donald Trump. Very right-wing, very conservative. And that led me to just follow as I consume media, as you all are seeing me kind of nerd out and like, damn, Kari, you know all of this stuff? Yeah, I follow a lot of pulses and media tracks just to see how people interpret information. And then when I looked at her speech and I looked at the translation, and I don't know what the validity is or what anything is, but most of her speeches was specifically about President Macron and France's actions of exploiting Africa and African nations and African resources. And I think this caused some instability with some of the other European countries because things have been since the start of this Ukrainian conflict very uneasy throughout Europe. Can you
Yes.
speak a little bit to what she was saying and others speaking to France's role in exploiting African resources? And some of it I thought was like gamesmanship saying like, hey, they stealing from you. We'll do business with you. More so to kind of like solidify, access to energy themselves.
Well, in actuality, a lot of these right-wing political parties in Western Europe have come up over the last decade due to the migration crisis. With the war in Libya in 2011, it created destabilizations throughout the entire North and West Africa region. You have human trafficking networks. People are promised employment in Europe, and when they get there, they find out that their lives are imperiled. And that's why you see almost every week people dying in the Mediterranean, drowning because of these human trafficking networks on crickety, unstable vessels that can sink or capsize at any moment. To keep Africans, Asians, Arabs out of southern, central, and western Europe, the right wing parties have come to the fore. Quite similar to what happened in 2016 here, where Donald Trump announces his campaign and talks about how we need to keep Mexicans out of the United States because they're criminals, or that we need to keep people who come from predominantly Muslim countries out of the United States because they are terrorists. So these are the type of calls and rhetoric and propaganda that we're hearing more and more in Western politics. And Trump is still a major political factor here in the United States, just like the right wing in Europe. Now, in France, they have the party led by Marie Le Pen, which is a right wing fascist party. It used to be called the National Front. And that party, of course, has a high and very strong anti-immigration theme. We've seen the same thing in Hungary, Italy, and the Netherlands, even in Britain. The whole Brexit movement of 2016 largely had a lot to do with the efforts to curb immigration in England. So people of color who are moving more and more into these Western industrialized states are creating political problems for the ruling class, and it actually provides a basis for the mobilization of racist and fascist elements, which have become prominent in politics and electoral politics. Look at the polls. The New York Times 2 weeks ago showed that Donald Trump was virtually tied with Joe Biden as it relates to next year's election in 2024.
And I also, like I say, I mean, I guess sometimes it's hard to tell which side of the coin either one of the parties kind of lie on per se.
Yeah, the
But I'm
leadership.
more so looking at the actions when we look at the distribution of resources, and I thought that it was an interesting perspective that Prime Minister Maloney was just more so saying, okay, this is why this is where you need to kind of angle things at President Macron and what France has been doing to your African countries, which in the whole thing, as they say, like, a wrong clock's right twice a day or something like that. But it's an interesting perspective in a lot of this theater of me observing internationally how the politics are transitioning and changing and just what resources exist and just how exploiting the resource. Our quality of life has such a direct relationship on the exploitations of others, the pulling of resources of others. Even for most of these cell phones, I forget what that mineral is in all these cell
Coltan.
phones. What
It
did you
comes out
say?
of the Democratic Republic of Congo, a lot of it.
And what's the mineral?
Coltan.
Coltan.
Yeah,
and,
right.
and the exploitative nature of how this
Yeah.
mineral is captured is as bad as the uranium, as bad as the
Lithium is another one,
yeah.
for the modern, energy resources for automobiles. Yes. So these resources exist in Africa. And of course, this is going to be a problem going forward. If you look at what's going on in Niger and it's going to continue until Africa actually takes control of its natural resources.
Which that's where you mentioned Libya, and I want to touch on that. Definitely, because when we look at one of the things that in the presidency of Barack Obama, one of the things that really turned my stomach so much was the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. Because I don't know how many people have an understanding of the lens of, like, most media presents Muammar Gaddafi as a terrorist, a radical, a crazed man, but did not have an idea of the quality of life of the average Libyan, of what the access they had to energy, education. What's looked at now is what we call universal basic income. The quality of life of the average Libyan was exponentially better than what I would say any place on the earth, the planet Earth, at the time before forces of led, through the commander in chief of Barack Obama and the
Yes.
Secretary of State of Hillary Clinton at the time,
Yes.
to his assassination. And what Muammar Gaddafi was planning and putting in place was to build an African currency, the Afro, that would be similar to the euro, and shifting from using the US dollar specifically for a lot of the oil trading that has been looked at as really the anchor in a lot of this trade for generations. And soon after the organizing for this, he's assassinated. Since his assassination, the quality of life for Libyans has fallen from what would be prominent as, I say, the highest quality of life in the world, to one of the most distraught. Like the reality is, everything that was said about Libya in our media before seems to be present now. And when you think of sex trafficking, human trafficking, what would be labeled as paramilitary groups or terrorism, or what we may call it, gun trading, Libya has become like a post of free will since the American occupation of Libya. Can you speak a little bit into that and what happened there?
Yeah, I think they utilized Barack Obama because he ran for president in 2008 as an African American. They portrayed his election as being historic, that the United States has become a post racial society. And then, some 2.5 years later, he backs a military intervention in Libya, utilizing same terrorist groups that they had been labeling as terrorists for many, many years. And
Okay,
also,
wait, and this is what I don't think people recognize. So Al Qaeda,
yes,
we know Al Qaeda. I mean, not just there. Al Qaeda is actually being used as a paramilitary force right now that is being sponsored through CIA, FBI, or American intervention in the Ukraine right now as well. But continue.
yeah, I mean, if we go back to the situation in Afghanistan during the late 1970s, early 1980s, that was the basis for the formation of Al Qaeda. They were used, they were funded, they were armed by the United States Central Intelligence Agency to fight against a socialist government that was in power in Afghanistan, a government that was backed by the former Soviet Union. So here we're going right back to the same geopolitical rivalry between the East and the West. I mean, as if today we have a new Cold War that has emerged. Even though Russia is no longer a socialist country, they still have strategic interests that puts them at loggerheads with the United States, France, Britain, Germany, and other Western European countries. So yes, the destruction of Libya at the aegis of the Barack Obama administration in the United States was a breeding ground, became a breeding ground for instability throughout North and West Africa. If you look at the situation in Mali, even in Niger, and in other countries in the region, it all started to a large degree or accelerated under the administration of President Barack Obama. And Hillary Clinton, who ran for president in 2016 and lost, she had that on her resume, that she was a proponent of the bombing of Libya, of the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, and the attempt to transform Libya in the image of the United States, which to this day, 12 years later, has not worked
And
at
that's what I
all.
want you to speak to. Can you speak about before his assassination, what Libya was like? And I gave my take. And then what's happening in Libya today?
Yeah, Libya was a former Italian colony. They fought like for 20, 30 years to take over Libya during the early part of the 20th century. Then, after that period, during World War II, when the Italians were, of course, allied with Adolf Hitler in Germany, uh, the British came in and became involved, and later the United States, in trying to defeat Italy and Germany in North Africa. So it was a battle between these Western industrialized countries among themselves to control this very strategic area in North Africa. When the United States and Britain got the upper hand there, they established a air base, the Wheelus Air Base in Libya. It became one of the largest air bases in North Africa and the Middle East region. When Gaddafi came to power in 1969, he closed the base. Also, with the tremendous oil wealth in Libya, he utilized the oil wealth to build up the country. And it became a showpiece for the entire African continent and other parts of the world. In fact, it was the most prosperous country in Africa. It had a higher economic quality index than even many countries in the southern part of Europe. They did not want that to happen, and particularly the fact that Gaddafi in 2009 was the chairperson of the African Union, which is the continental organization that brings all the African states together into one organization that's based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. When he came here in 2009 to speak at the United Nations General Assembly, it was clear at that time that they wanted to remove him from power. Obama refused to even greet him at the UN security at the UN General Assembly meeting, and it was only a year and a half after that that they began bombing Libya and destroying the country, killing 50 to 100,000 people, displacing 2 million, and overturning the entire Jimahadiya system, which was a socialist system that provided wealth to the majority of the people inside Libya. In fact, they had a lot of people who came from other parts of Africa, from other parts of the world, who worked there, who had set up businesses there and were quite prosperous. They were built in social services policies. When people got married, they got a sum of money. When they had a child, they got a huge sum of money. They had free housing inside the country. So all of this was going on there until it was destroyed at the aegis of the United States, France, Britain, and the other NATO states. So today, Libya is divided. The quality of living of the people has declined precipitously, and at the same time, it's become a center for destabilization throughout the entire region.
All right, and this even ties to as we put all the puzzle pieces together, because now I think we got all the puzzle pieces. And as we put this together, what's happening in Niger today, and Libya being so close to it?
Well, as I mentioned before, President Mohamed Bazoum, who got into office 2 years ago, they claim that he was democratically elected. There's questions in that regard.
But the other fact is he's not even from Niger.
No, he is.
Okay,
As
he is
far
from
as far as
Niger.
I know, yeah,
Okay.
he comes from. It appears as if he comes from one of the Tuareg groups there. Africa is not one country. We want it to be one country, but there are many different ethnic groups, many different nationalities in the continent, and people cross borders
All
for,
the time.
several centuries.
Okay.
And the demarcation lines were drawn by the imperialists
True.
based upon their own interests. So
True.
when you say, well, somebody's not from Niger or somebody's not from Nigeria, so forth, look at the border between Niger and Nigeria. Look at the border between Algeria and Niger. Uh, the same people who speak the same language and have the same
It's right
culture
there.
are on both sides of the borders. Northern Nigeria, for example, used to be considered Hausa land, and that extended into what today is known as Niger. So you had the Hausa city states. You know, if we go back and read African history, they talked about Kano and the other Hausa city states. This was prior to colonialism coming into that region of the world. So yes, Africa has made a tremendous contribution to world history, and of course, prior to the advent of slavery and colonialism, there were many prosperous African societies, kingdoms, and cultures that existed.
Well, thank you for that information because I was under the impression that he wasn't even from there, and he was, as we've seen, he was a supported candidate
Yeah, he was
by outside
by France
influences.
and the United States. Anthony Blinken, who was the Secretary of State under the Biden administration, just
Yeah.
visited there several months ago, and there are photographs of him taking pictures with Mohamed Bazoum. But Bazoum was there essentially to provide political cover for France and the United States. I mentioned the United States has two drone stations in Niger.
And this was so one of the other things in the presidency of Barack Obama is a lot of the Afrocoms that begin to pop up in Africa specifically, where you have military bases existing throughout Africa more prevalently in his administration, and some of the works there for like a lot of the drone stations and things like that. This also is prevalent in studying, as they say, some of the conflicts of the Horn of Africa and what's been happening in
Ethiopia,
Somalia,
yeah,
Ethiopia, and Eritrea.
yeah, Djibouti as well in the Horn. They have a base in Djibouti. Yep, they do. So, yeah, if you think about it, the United States Africa Command was started a little over 15 years ago under the administration of President George W. Bush Jr. All right. And when it started, it was quite controversial on the continent. Nobody wanted to set up a base in their country. Yet, since that time period, they have reframed at least their propaganda about what AFRICOM is supposed to be. They claim they're there to help the African countries strengthen their security and military apparatuses in order to fight terrorism. But when we look back at groups like Al Qaeda and even ISIS in more recent years, they have their origins in United States intelligence. So it's a vicious game that's being played. You know, if you can fund these groups inside of Africa, inside West Asia, and at the same time, if they can inflict casualties on the population, that provides a rationale for the U.S. and France and NATO to come in and say, yeah, we're protecting you against these terrorists, but at the same time, we want your uranium, we want your gold, we want your oil, we want your natural gas, your coltan, your bauxite, your iron ore on our terms. So it's a very
And
vicious cycle.
usually, so people understand like the percentages. Let's break this down in money. So, like, let's say like one stock of whatever this good is. Are we looking at percentages like out of every $100 worth of uranium that's being pulled out? If you had to put an amount of money that's actually going back to the nation, is it $5? Is it $10? Is it $20? What would you say?
That's clearly a minority of the fund. It's not the majority of the money that's being earned in terms of profits and ownership. What goes back to the governments, in many cases, is not even clear. Like in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, in the eastern region, they have a tremendous amount of natural resources there, but they have militia groups that are guarding the mining facilities. And a lot of the resources that are being taken out of the country are not even recorded on the books, at least within the DRC itself. So you can get an idea of the resources that are being stolen from the people, from their country, that there's no record of. And if there is a record, it's always much less than what the people themselves are receiving. That's why they have to have puppet leaders to front for the transnational corporations, to front for the U.S. military and the French military in order to justify or attempt to justify what they're doing inside these countries. That's why Mohamed Bazoum is so valuable to France and the United States, because he's willing to play that role as a representative of imperialism, actually, in Africa. And Niger is a major base for U.S. and French, as well as other NATO country military operations in West Africa. And they do not want anyone else that's hostile to the United States to come in and assist in any way. For example, in Mali, they have invited the Wagner group there. They've also invited them into the Central African Republic where they're operating.
So
And they
Wagner, let me get
yeah,
that.
okay.
Wagner is the paramilitary group that a couple weeks back you may have saw a story saying that Russian troops have dissented from following Russian orders and now are about to storm Moscow right now. That group of soldiers were soldiers connected to the Wagner group. The Wagner group could be looked at as like a mercenary group that you hire for military operations, hence wars, and it was a call that said like, okay, people are marching towards Moscow to take over the Kremlin, and that was that story didn't come to light the same way that the story was reported as the civil war that was happening in Russia. That group was the Wagner group.
Yes, but what's interesting is that that scenario, as you said, never really played out. I mean, was this real or was it just a diversion?
I now
You know,
that I can't
because
speak
he hasn't
to.
been arrested.
Yeah.
Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's still walking around. He was in Belarus for a while. He was at the Russia-Africa summit last month that took place in St. Petersburg.
I was
So,
just
I
sharing
mean,
this information.
I know that's
Yeah,
what we're
because
fed every day.
that's the
Right.
information how we may know what that group
Exactly.
is, so we have an
Right.
understanding that, and it's just not Wagner. It's a lot of paramilitary groups, mercenaries that do exist.
Remember Blackwater that started right here in Michigan? Yeah, they were involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, what happened to them?
I have no idea.
They changed their name and now they're much more conspicuous. But yeah, these groups exist all over the world.
Yeah, and when you speak about this, even when just first off, the tragedy of that when we get in drones, the whole concept of like it's like smart bombs.
Yeah, you have Reaper drones, which largely do surveillance, and then there are Predator drones, which can carry out missile strikes, targeted assassinations, blowing up buildings, facilities, and so forth.
And the challenge with this, another thing during, now I would say like every presidency since the Trump, the Obama, and now even the Biden presidency is these drone strikes are looked at like they're precise and they're on point and they're targeted and they know who they're hitting. The reality is a lot of these drone strikes are harming and murdering innocent men, women, and children that are not involved in war. These are not soldiers.
Yes.
It's been well documented, especially when we think of the devastation of so many people that have been murdered
Yes.
from these horrific acts, and hence me being for peace and anti-war is more so me being for life. I think I can't even imagine the tragedy when I even think of that at sometimes just the landscape of living in America, Black America, the prevalence of guns that just exist in all of America itself,
Yes.
and innocent people to be murdered because of a war conflict amongst leaders, when some of this can be diplomatically, I guess, agreed upon and worked out. It's I don't even know a term to say what this is, but a lot of the drones
These are
and the
war
smart,
crimes. That's
yeah,
what they are because, like
yeah,
in Afghanistan, they have killed people who are on wedding processions. Elders who are having meetings in the rural areas have been targeted by these drone attacks under the guise that they're attacking terrorists. During the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, remember 2 years ago,
yeah.
they actually carried out a drone attack in Kabul, the capital, and hit a family who was actually packing to be evacuated by the Americans to come to the United States. And they were hit under the guise that they were unloading some type of bombs that could have been used again to hit U.S. forces there. We've seen the same situation in Iraq, in Libya, and so many other countries where they've used drones, although they claim to be precision missiles. At the same time, they've killed a lot of
Yeah.
innocent people.
So, with all of this being said, and we have all the puzzle pieces, what's next? How do we with this information now support peace to exist? How do we encourage less violence, and be supportive of life and
Well,
quality of life.
as it relates to the AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, we have to educate more people about the dangers of that military unit and what it has done over the last decade and a half.
Hmm.
Many of the people in the Congress, particularly the Congressional Black Caucus, today do not even discuss with any real precision foreign policy. They tend to go right along with the Biden administration. For example, leading black congresspersons went to Poland with Nancy Pelosi to actually agitate for a greater military presence in the Ukraine theater.
Yeah.
They went to Taiwan with Nancy Pelosi, which was an aspect of the agitational policy towards the People's Republic of China. So we have to put pressure on those Congress people, on the people who work within the administration in Washington, D.C., to say, no, you're not representing us by creating more hostility around the world, by taking money that should be utilized to rebuild communities, to build houses, to build medical facilities, to build schools and improve schools, to provide energy resources for people, clean water for people, accessibility of water and other things that you need for sustenance. That's where the investment should be, not in creating more hostility and more long-term military conflicts around the world.
So I got to play a little bit of I got to give the other argument in this, because the other argument will be, well, these people that are in these leadership positions are exploiting their people. They're taking the resources. They're hoarding things. They're blocking. The one place that these people work is the uranium mines. And if these people are blocking people from going in there and working, this is going to naturally impact the lives of the women and children there. We want to step in and offer, as we've seen it before, we want to offer democracy. We want to offer peace and stability as the leader of the free world. What would you say to that?
Well, do we really have democracy here in the United States? I mean, we've undergone tremendous attacks, even on the bourgeois democratic system that exists in this country. For example, people who work, for example, cannot make necessary funds to pay their basic expenses. There's a tremendous amount of people who cannot afford housing in the United States, cannot afford to buy food. I was on the Southwest side several weeks ago. I saw cars lined up for blocks and blocks and blocks. And I asked somebody on the street, why are these cars here? I thought maybe it was a sporting event or some type of concert. Somebody on the street told me, no, they're giving away food at a location about a mile away. Is this the democracy that we're talking about in the United States? No, I don't think so. And a lot of reasons why we don't have these resources is because of the Pentagon budget. And it's also because of the hoarding of resources by the most prominent and the most wealthiest people inside the United States. There needs to be a redistribution of priorities and also a redistribution of wealth in order for us to be considered really a democratic system here in the United States. But in regard to dictatorships in other parts of the world, many of them are supported and have historically been supported by the United States.
Then the next question I have for you is France and Macron. What do you see France doing next in reference to this conflict, especially being that still kind of reeling from things internally in their own nation and preparing for what could be a very tough wintertime for what could happen really in most of Europe, as you know, for people that have followed a lot of just the European grid of energy and heating Europe, which is, can get cold, it relies on a lot of that Russian resource that no longer will be given to them through Germany, and that, the pipeline that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it was blown up, and they tried to say that the Russian military blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, but it would not be in their interest to destroy their own pipeline. All they would have to do is just to cut it off from their side. Why would they destroy it if they wanted to deny energy resources to Europe? Seymour Hersh, who is an investigative journalist who's been working for decades, going all the way back to the Vietnam War and Iraq, he wrote a lot of great articles about that, said that the United States itself, through its own intelligence apparatus and the military structures, blew up that pipeline. And it provides an opportunity for the U.S. to sell more of its natural gas and its oil to these Western European countries. But their efforts to try to bring down the Russian Federation economically and militarily has not worked. Over the last year and a half, we've seen that Russia has not collapsed, that they still are producing the majority of wheat in the country. They're still very rich in terms of oil and other natural
Well,
resources.
in the continent,
Yes.
and many other resources. But what do you see next for France? That's what I'm saying. Like, what do you think from what you know in your travels and understanding of history and matters like this? What do you think President Macron? And let's not even speak on people as much as let's just speak on the
The
entities.
system.
Yes.
Yeah, because he'll be gone
Yeah.
soon enough. But I don't see the economic conditions in France improving in the short term, and a lot of it has to do with the Ukraine war. The U.S. as well as the European Union and the U.K. have poured tremendous resources into this failed military operation in Ukraine. Even the mainstream media right now, if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and others, if you read them carefully, they point out that this war that Biden was instrumental in sparking is not achieving its strategic objective. In fact, right now, a lot of Ukrainians are being killed. A lot of the military equipment that is being sent by the United States and other NATO countries is being destroyed by Russian missiles and other forms of offensive operations. So they have not been successful with this much championed spring offensive, summer offensive, and so forth. And a lot of Ukrainians are dying. A lot of them are being seriously injured. And a lot of this information is not being brought front and center to people here in the United States. So uh, it's really a tragic situation that we have unfolding right now in Ukraine. And the Biden administration is going to have to be accountable for this in the presidential elections next year because if he has such a high disapproval rating and a low approval rating in the country, a lot of it is clearly related, uh, consciously or unconsciously, to the failures that have taken place in Ukraine and prior to that, Afghanistan. His withdrawal from Afghanistan was quite embarrassing for the United States diplomatically, and the same situation is unfolding right now in Ukraine. Can they win the Ukraine war? It doesn't appear as if they will, and if they continue with this conflict to supply arms, advisors, for example, the cluster bombs. Now, supposedly the United States has not used cluster bombs, cluster munitions since 2016. That's 7 years ago, all right? They said initially they would not turn them over. It's a controversial weapon. Over 100 countries have banned it. Yet, a few months ago, he says, yeah, let's give Ukraine cluster bombs. How are cluster munitions going to strategically advance the cause of Ukraine and NATO in that part of the world? Same situation with the F-16 fighter planes. They just announced last week that they're going to supply F-16 fighter planes to Ukraine. What good is that going to do? Because people have to be trained in the utilization of those aircraft, and they can be shot down, they can be jammed, and Russia is heavily dug in the eastern regions of Ukraine. Minefields, their tanks, and their conventional military forces, which is almost impossible for the Ukrainian troops to break through their lines. So they are being literally massacred in Ukraine. And unfortunately, a lot of people in this country are not seeing what is actually unfolding in Eastern Europe.
And I want to come back to Africa again, and I
Yes.
want to speak to Niger. It was a surprising thing. One of the first things that stood out. Shout out my dad, Greg Frazier. When we were speaking, he was like, "Hey, you know those brothers over there, Victoria Nuland. I don't know if people are familiar, but the Secretary of State is." As much as the president is the commander in chief of the nation, the Secretary of State usually deals with me military. What happens with the military? Our Secretary of State currently in the United States is Victoria Nuland.
She's acting deputy,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
assistant secretary of state.
and
Yeah,
Victoria Nuland went to
Ukraine.
Niger
Yeah, yeah. She
with
went to yeah.
with
Recently.
recently with $200 million,
Yeah, I know.
and said, "Hey, I got $200 million. If you guys are willing to, calm things down and what's going on, and we can work this out." And those brothers over there said, "Nah, keep your money."
Yeah,
And
right.
that was something that I sat back and I kind of said, "Wow, this is something different." To see the functionality of the brothers saying like, "Nah, we don't want any of that U.S. money. We know what we're fighting for.
Right.
We know what's going on. You don't need to step in here and enter in with the American diplomacy to solve these issues. This is a conflict we got with France. We're going to handle this with France, even though we know that you're aligned and allied with France, but we're going to deal with this." As I don't know if people understand this, please reference back to my interview with Russ Ballant, where you talk about NATO existing, but NATO, the North American Trade Organization, I believe.
Treaty organization.
Treaty
Yeah,
organization.
right.
So basically, in short, I'm gonna give you guys a short description of it. After World War II, this is one of the key, I guess, competitive advantages to set America in this assailing ascension to become the leader of the free world, because America enters the I guess, if this is like the Royal Rumble, comparing it to wrestling that I like or something, America enters like near the end of the Royal Rumble, and is the most I guess you would say like less battle tested nation at the time, to be in a political position to basically, quote unquote, I guess, stabilize the world at the time, where a lot of these other European nations are like, just dealing with like rebuilding their nations. So it was like, hey, we can establish this organization, which really, this organization of NATO was kind of it was an anti-Soviet organization, because there was a treaty amongst all the nations that were not the Soviet army. The unique thing about this is that if you really study world history, please watch Oliver Stone's documentaries on World War II, but it was the Soviet army that took on the brunt of defeating the Third Reich in Germany, period. Like, if it wasn't for Stalin and the Soviet army, we would probably be, I would be saying Guten Tag instead of what up though. You know what I'm saying? Like this, so it was the Soviet army then, but America was like, look, Winston Churchill and Roosevelt at the time said, let's establish something different. This NATO can be a treaty amongst us, but we'll also share in war responsibility. So a lot of the European nations kind of disarmed and didn't keep the same. Didn't have the need to have the military apparatus and troops as before, because they relied on NATO. And basically, it's like, if a NATO country, like, this is going back to like kind of gang rules, kind of like, if you get in a beef and you in NATO, I'm in a beef. So I'm fighting when you fighting. Hence, this has really been the linchpin of the Ukrainian conflict, as a lot of other nations were saying, we want Ukraine to be in NATO. And it was always a linchpin, and even since Gorbachev, this is going way back to more political history, saying, look, NATO, we do not want any NATO country moving closer to Russia, because the whole start of NATO was always to keep Russia out of NATO. Even when Putin ascended to his presidency first, he was even flirting around with like, hey, I'll get in NATO if y'all let me. And it's like, no, we don't want you in NATO. So like, a lot of the underlined mission of what NATO was to basically be an anti-communist, anti-Soviet, anti-Russian organization. So Victoria Nuland is there for many reasons, but also because of the allied relationship between France and the United States of America, and also the United States of America's role in working and aligning with NATO. And in traveling there, offering the brothers in Africa, hey, here's $200 million. Let's bring back the other president. Let's stabilize everything in the country. Why are you guys fighting so much for these uranium deposits and everything? Let's make sure things are cool. The brothers over there said, nope, you can keep it moving. Similar to another place from France, what's happening in Haiti right now with some of the resources there. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah. that's how Ukraine is very much connected with the developments in Niger and West Africa. Victoria Nuland, at the time in 2014 of the Ukraine coup, was also involved in State Department functions, and she actually was the political coordinator of the overthrow of democratically elected government in Ukraine in February of 2014. It's well documented at this point, so it's not surprising they would bring her and send her to Niger to try to intimidate the military government there, but it is not working because they have the support of the majority of the people in Niger. I mean, just this weekend, tens of thousands of young people showed up at the stadium in the capital of Niamey, wanting to volunteer to serve in the Nigerian military. They were totally overwhelmed with the number of volunteers that they got over the weekend. Also, people in other countries throughout the region have rejected the economic community of West African states' threats to intervene. And this intervention, of course, would be covered and supported and given logistical assistance by France and the United States.
And Nigeria, even as I saw, like something about like the energy ways and Nigeria, like I
They're right
believe it
across the
was,
border, yeah.
I believe it was like the president said, "Hey, we may be interested," and then the parliament in Nigeria was like, "Hold
Yeah.
on, hold on,
The
hold
Senate.
on,
The Senate.
please speak."
And the Senate is controlled by the party that the president ostensibly represents. So his own party rejected his rhetoric of threatening the government in Niger with military intervention. So he's really going way out on the limb politically and in terms of the security of Nigeria itself by continuing to saber rattle against Niger. Now they have also yesterday they sent a diplomatic mission to Niger to hold discussions. The military government told them that they had a 3-year transitional process that they were implementing. And ECOWAS said, well, that's no good. We can't accept that. But who are they? They've been threatening for the last 3 weeks, to bust up into Niger and reimpose Mohamed Bazoum. And they have not done it because they know they don't have the support of their own people, and they could be putting themselves in a very precarious situation.
And that's what makes it so unique. It's that people are turning down the money.
Yes.
Even the other the neighboring countries are turning down the money.
Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea,
That's
Algeria.
what's so fascinating about this when we look, because historically you're just so used to seeing, you know, another nation or another group of people saying like, look, I don't like that guy, I'll take him out or something,
Yeah.
like, but this isn't what's happening right here.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this so historic.
It is. It's very, very interesting development that's been taking place over the last 3 years in the West Africa region, and we have to see how it's going to unfold. The United States does not want to give up its drone stations there, its intelligence apparatus. They don't want to withdraw their troops, but they do have contingency plans. It was reported, even through their own sources, that they do have contingency plans for taking down the drone stations and also for evacuating their troops from Niger. Whether it'll get to that point depends on what happens over the next few weeks.
So with that, we're at the end now. How do people get in contact with you if they want to get some more of this information? Where should they go? What sources are your sources? We just shared. So a lot of my sources, let me say, okay, where am I getting a lot of this stuff? So when I get a lot of this military stuff, first, I look to it's a great brother, Gerald Horn. So I get a lot of information from Gerald Horn. Look to him on YouTube. You Google Gerald Horn. I look to a lot of some of my information from Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon, another brother that has more, I would say, more like of a international and perspective of like bringing things together. And then actually this white dude, Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former
Weapons
military
inspector.
yeah, there we go. So
Yeah, right.
like right then and there, and definitely during the time of I don't even know, I can't even call, I don't know what Iraq was. And knowing people that went there, it wasn't really a war or occupation. I don't know what that was, but during that time, Scott Ritter kind of realized the same thing I realized, like what's going on here, and that since then has spoke a different tone about just unpacking the way that military moves, from American military history and then just military history. Can you share where people can get in contact with you to get more information, and then some of your sources?
Yeah, they can read my blog at the Pan African Newswire, and that's at panafricannews.blogspot.com. Now, on that blog, there are links to all the major news agencies across Africa and other parts of the world. So you can find information on what is happening in all the African countries, as well as what's happening internationally. I'm also on Facebook, the former platform that was formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. And yeah, so people can reach me in that regard.
All right, so definitely. So there you go. That's like some of the sourced information and the real information. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna be next, but similar to Russ Balan, I could see myself having another interview with you. Hopefully, things become peaceful and remain peaceful, and a diplomatic response to all of this does happen.
Most definitely. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Peace be.
Stay up on the real culture of Detroit by tuning in to the Detroit is Different podcast network weekly. Music, art, business, comedy, and never before told stories from the people of Detroit.